Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. In the quiet landscape of the Marche region, a single, enigmatic image challenges everything we think we know about history. Inside the ancient church of San Claudio at Chienti, a saint is portrayed not as a bishop, but as a builder, holding a hammer, a square, and wearing a craftsman's apron. From this striking detail, Simonetta Torresi unfolds a remarkable journey across centuries, linking a Merovingian prince, Charlemagne, medieval cathedral builders, and the hidden origins of Masonic tradition. What begins as a simple fresco becomes a gateway into a deeper, largely forgotten history, one where symbols speak and the past reveals far more than it seems. Simonetta Torresi begins by describing the Church of San Claudio at Chienti, located in the municipality of Cordonia, in the province of Macerata, as one of the most singular architectural presences in the medieval landscape of the Marche region. Its plan takes the form of a Greek cross, but with a feature that makes it nearly unique in the panorama of Italian sacred architecture. The lateral bays stand at exactly the same height as the central one. In canonical Greek cross churches, the lateral naves are normally lower than the main nave. Here, by contrast, all the arches develop at the same level, articulated by four pillars that support the structure with perfect equilibrium. It is neither a Latin cross nor a Greek cross in the conventional sense. It is something different altogether, a unicum of which very few other examples are known anywhere in Italy. The architectural singularity of the building is not, however, the only reason it demands attention. Inside, at the far end of the apse, on the right-hand wall beside a window, there is a fresco depicting Saint Claudio. The image strikes anyone who observes it with a careful eye. The figure does not wear the episcopal vestments one would expect of a bishop, but instead carries a hammer, a carpenter's square, and a work apron. He is, in every respect, the figure of a master builder. He bears the full toolkit of the medieval craftsman, and this iconographic choice, apparently bizarre for a church prelate, conceals a layering of meanings that runs across centuries of history, weaving together Frankish dynastic events, late antique hagiographic traditions, monastic architectural knowledge, and even the history of modern Freemasonry. To understand who San Claudio truly was, one must go back to the origins of the Merovingian dynasty and one of the most dramatic episodes in its history. His original name is Clodoald, later contracted to Claudio, and he is the nephew of Clovis, king of all the Franks, and of his wife Clotilde. Upon the death of his father, the dominant branch of the royal house, the one reigning from Paris and representing the most powerful line of the Frankish family, decides to eliminate the heirs of the deceased brother. The plan is carried out through a deception. The children are brought to their grandmother Clotilde in the Frankish capital. There the king presents the woman with a brutal choice: The nephews may either be confined to a monastery or put to death. Clotilde, in a moment of despair that tradition has passed down with horror, chooses death rather than see them stripped of their freedom forever. Almost all the children are thus eliminated. One alone survives, Clotilde, the youngest, whom loyal barons manage to spirit away from the Parisian court. The young man finds refuge in Piracco, in the Marche, alongside Saint Severinus, and grows up there sheltered from the plots against his life. In the years that follow, Clotilde, whose name, by contraction, becomes simply Claudio, is appointed Bishop of Recina, the ancient Roman city today identified with the hamlet of Villa Potenza in the municipality of Macerata, where he exercises his episcopal ministry. The story of Recina, however, becomes entangled with the ambitions of the Merovingian kings who, descending from France into the Italian peninsula, conquer the city. Faced with the advance, the monks of Recina's cathedral flee in different directions. Many take refuge on the opposite hill, where they found what will become the original nucleus of the Abbey of Rambona. Others, crossing the river, give life to the city of Recanati, whose Latin name, Recina, transparently betrays its direct descent from the abandoned settlement. Clotilde chooses a different route. He flees along the valley of the river Trotica, then a far more significant watercourse than it is today, and heads toward the Chienti Valley. The choice is not random. In that valley reigns another son of Clovis, born however of a different mother, not of Clotilde, a half-brother who took no part in the conspiracy against the deceased brother's children. Clotilde therefore feels safe in his company, and there spends the final years of his life, dying peacefully in the Chienti Valley. Centuries later, when Pippin seizes the Frankish kingdom through a coup d'état backed by papal support, and Charlemagne consolidates Carolingian dominion over Europe, an episode of extraordinary symbolic and political significance unfolds. Charlemagne feels the need to build his palace and his Palatine chapel on the very spot where Clotilde, by then venerated as San Claudio, had lived and been buried. The gesture is neither accidental nor devoid of meaning. Charlemagne's relationship with the Merovingians is complex and contradictory. He has deposed them, yet the memory of that dynasty remains alive and powerful. In his second marriage, he has wed a woman of Merovingian origin, and the question of dynastic legitimacy remains an open wound. To build his imperial chapel on ground sacred to an illustrious member of the deposed lineage is at once an act of symbolic appropriation and, perhaps, an attempt at reconciliation with that tradition. Inside the Palatine chapel, Charlemagne has the relics of San Claudio's body brought and enshrined. The area, previously known by a name evoking its waters, a kind of local Aachen, with reference to the springs present in the valley, is from that moment identified in popular usage as San Claudio, in honor of the bishop buried there. The name gradually replaces every other designation. Archaeological excavations conducted near the present church have brought to light the remains of an even older religious building, situated in the immediate vicinity. This is the original church built in honor of Clotilde shortly after his death, the founding nucleus around which the entire history of the site unfolds. The Carolingian Palatine chapel thus grafts itself onto a devotion already deeply rooted, layering imperial prestige upon it. The story of San Claudio's relics continues across the following centuries. When the Holy House of Nazareth arrives in Loreto, the saint's remains are translated to the Loretan shrine, where they join its treasury of sacred relics. With the arrival of Napoleon Bonaparte in Italy, among the many treasures seized from Loreto during his requisitions, the saint's remains are taken away as well. This is a coincidence worth noting. Napoleon, who was himself a Freemason, shortly after that removal promulgates the famous decree known as the Edict of St. Cloud, that is, of San Claudio, by which he establishes that burial grounds must be located outside inhabited centers. The name of the edict carries within it, almost paradoxically, the memory of the very saint whose relics the emperor had just confiscated. Much as he had attempted to take possession of documents and relics tied to the origins of these traditions, The English would later carry out a parallel reset through what became known as the New Masonic Genealogy, as will be seen presently. The question posed by the fresco in the Church of San Claudio is precise and unavoidable. Why is a bishop depicted with the tools of a builder? Why does he carry hammer, square, and apron rather than the symbols of his ecclesiastical ministry? The answer that emerges from historical analysis opens a window onto a little-known or deliberately obscured world, that of medieval operative masonry. The word mason, which in the popular imagination evokes secret lodges and initiatory rites, derives simply from the medieval Latin word for builder. The master builders of the Middle Ages, those who possessed the knowledge required to design and construct the great cathedrals, were precisely the masons, the builders. And these builders were, in the overwhelming majority of cases, monks. Medieval Masonic lodges were not secret associations in the modern sense. They were workshops of practical knowledge, technical laboratories in which the master builder, the architect, coordinated the work of stonecutters, carpenters, sculptors, and specialized laborers. The word lodge probably derives from the fact that these gatherings took place under open loggie, sheltered spaces set up at cathedral building sites. In the absence of technical drawings in the form we know today, the architectural project as a written and drawn document did not exist in the Middle Ages. The master builder had to issue instructions day by day, telling each craftsman which section to work on, which proportions to observe, how to execute the work. It was a practical, ongoing school where knowledge was transmitted orally and through direct labor under the master's guidance. Torresi makes clear that the construction of cathedrals required knowledge of geometry, statics, and proportion that was by no means common. The Pythagorean laws, the theorems of Euclid, the golden ratios were bodies of learning carefully guarded in monastic environments and passed on in specific schools, inaccessible to the general public. In an age when even learning to write entailed the consumption of precious parchment, and therefore an enormous economic cost that only monasteries could sustain, much of this knowledge circulated exclusively by word of mouth within religious communities. Geometry was a reserved form of knowledge not for mysterious or esoteric reasons, but simply because it was the exclusive province of those who needed to put it to practical use, the monk builders. The first document that attests with certainty the presence of a Masonic lodge near a cathedral building site in Italy concerns Orvieto, in the province of Perugia. While the magnificent and imposing cathedral of the city is under construction, there is direct evidence of a lodge of master builders operating on the site. The architect, the master builder, who leads this extraordinary undertaking is a Benedictine monk of San Silvestro, born in Singoli, in the province of Macerata, around the year 1250, for Bevignate. His rediscovery is relatively recent. For a long time, historiography attributed the direction of the Orvietan building site to others, until research identified him as the principal figure, documented in the sources until 1305. Fra Bevignate is not only the builder of Orvieto Cathedral. His hand is also recognizable in the Church of San Francesco in Gubbio, and, above all, in the aqueduct of Perugia and the celebrated Fontana Maggiore of that same city, on which an inscription recalls him as the father of Perugia. He dies, in all probability, while working on the building site of Perugia's cathedral, leaving that final work unfinished. The connection between Fra Bevignate and San Claudio is subtle but powerful. Bevignate is born in Singoli, the same city in which there exists an ancient abbey, whose earliest document dates to 1130, that bears the stable title of the most holy four crown martyrs between 1230 and 1375. These saints are the patrons par excellence of builders and stonecutters, closely interwoven with the operative Masonic tradition. A monk born in the city where the four crown martyrs are venerated, who becomes the greatest architect of his time and establishes a Masonic lodge at the building site of his most important work, is not a coincidence to be dismissed. Throughout the Middle Ages, the recognized patrons of builders, stonecutters, and craft guilds are not individual figures, but a collective group of saints, the Four Crowned Saints. According to the most widespread tradition, they are four stonecutters converted to Christianity who, during the persecutions of Emperor Diocletian, suffered martyrdom in Pannonia, in present-day Hungary, between 304 and 305 AD. Their names are Symphorian, Nicostratus, Castorius, and, significantly, Claudius. Venerated alongside them is also Saint Simplicius, executed for having gathered and honored the martyr's remains. Claudius is therefore, already within this hagiographic tradition, one of the four crowned saints, which goes a long way toward explaining why Bishop Clodoald is depicted with the tools of a builder. His identification with the namesake stonecutter martyr, who shares his name, the era of the cult's diffusion, and the link with Frankish lands, eventually caused the two figures to be superimposed in popular iconography, generating the representation visible in the Chienti Valley fresco. There also exists an alternative tradition concerning the four crowned saints, offering different names: Carpophorus, Victorinus, and Severianus, who refused to venerate a statue of Asclepius and faced martyrdom along the Appian Way at Albano. According to some historians, the confusion between the two groups arises from the fact that the tombs of one group were occupied by the relics of the other at the time of the translation from Pannonia. It is worth noting that in San Severino Marche, a Victorinus is documented as having fallen martyr precisely during the Diocletianic persecutions. The names and places recur, like a network threading through centuries and diverse geographies. The veneration of the four crowned saints spreads early beyond Italy. The Venerable Bede, between the 7th and 8th centuries, records the existence of a church dedicated to them in Canterbury. In Italy, churches dedicated to them are extremely rare. The most important stands in Rome, on the Celian Hill. A representation of the group appears in the Tabernacle of the Stone and Timber Trades at Orsamachele in Florence. And then, in a particularly striking way, in Singoli, the city of Fra Bevignate, where the abbey bears their title for over a century. The bond between the four crowned saints and medieval operative masonry is documented in the Old Charges, a collection composed largely of medieval manuscripts. Among these stands out the Regius manuscript, a poem written around 1390, considered one of the oldest known Masonic documents, which in verses 495 to 534 recounts the deeds of 9 martyrs. The 4 from Pannonia, those from Albano, and Saint Simplicius, regarded by the Masonic tradition as a homogeneous group. This text constitutes the symbolic foundation of the link between cathedral builders and martyrdom for the Christian faith, a link that runs through the centuries without ever fully breaking. In 1884, in London, a group of 9 Freemasons draws explicit inspiration from the stonecutter saints to found a new lodge with a precise purpose: to propose an authentic, documented Masonic genealogy in place of the writings deemed fantastical or legendary that had characterized the preceding Masonic historiography. The lodge is officially opened in 1886 and takes the name of Quatuor Coronati Lodge. It is still considered today the founding institution of what is called the authentic school of Masonic research. The lodge publishes annual transactions, the Ars Quatuor Coronatorum, and has established a worldwide correspondence circle, the Quatuor Coronati Correspondence Circle, to enable the participation of Freemasons from across the globe. One of the most authoritative journals of English Freemasonry still bears the title Ars Quatuor Coronatorum. In Germany, too, the tradition of the stonecutters leads to the adoption of the four crowned saints as patrons of operative masonry. This London operation, Torresi argues, must be read in parallel with what Napoleon did on the level of relics and documents. Both gestures, that of the Corsican emperor and that of the English lodge, represent attempts at appropriation and rewriting of a tradition whose roots lie deep in central Italy, and in the Marche in particular. The Quatuor Coronati Lodge, while adopting the name of the four crowned saints, in effect dismisses as legends, fables, and inventions everything that had occurred before in the history of Masonry. A historiographical reset that erases authentic origins in order to replace them with a new, controlled narrative, despite the symbolic title the lodge has given itself. A crucial aspect for understanding the intellectual world in which medieval master builders move concerns the history of Gothic architecture and the geometric knowledge that makes it possible. The great French and German Gothic cathedrals, with their extraordinary heights and proportions that seem to defy the technical capabilities of the Middle Ages, raise well-founded questions. Buildings such as Notre Dame de Paris, in their current form, date largely from the 19th century, not the medieval period. A telling sign is the absence of frescoes in the churches of Northern Europe. Where there are no frescoes, the churches did not exist in the medieval centuries, since frescoes are the characteristic decoration of medieval interiors, painted in conjunction with the construction of the buildings themselves. The authentically medieval cathedrals, those that can genuinely be associated with operative masonry, are instead the Italian ones, and in particular those of central Italy. Less imposing than the great 19th century Northern European churches, but genuine. In the Marche, examples of flamboyant Gothic can be found that predate its spread elsewhere in Europe. The Collegiata of San Genesio, in the province of Macerata, dates to around the year 1000, completed by 1098, and already displays flamboyant Gothic forms at a time when mainstream historiography still places Italian architecture firmly within the Romanesque. The frescoes of the Salimbeni brothers, produced in the same geographical area, testify to an artistic and architectural vitality that precedes, rather than follows, the great seasons of Northern European Gothic. The Cathedral of Orvieto, built by Fra Bevignate, is a further example, constructed in sections with solid, documented geometric knowledge, an authentic witness to a constructive tradition that has nothing to envy in the great churches north of the Alps. The geometry that makes all of this possible is of Western origin. The very word, from the Greek geometria, measurement of the earth, denotes a body of knowledge born in the West with Euclid and developed within the classical Mediterranean world. It was not imported from the East, but exported toward it through contact between civilizations. What the West receives from the East is something different and equally revolutionary. The positional numeral system of Indian origin, transmitted through Arab mediation, centered on the zero, the symbol assigned to nothingness. The numerals commonly called Arabic are in fact Indian numerals, which the Arabs learned when they conquered the subcontinent and then passed on to the West around the year 1000. To assign a symbol to what does not exist, to give a number to nothing, is a conceptual step of extraordinary reach, transforming not only the way of calculating, but the very structure of mathematical thought. When the two traditions meet, Western Euclidean geometry and Indian Arab positional numerals, geometric calculation becomes enormously more powerful and agile, and architectural possibilities multiply accordingly. The Macerata-born Jesuit Father Matteo Ricci closes this circle in symbolic fashion by translating Euclid's elements into Chinese in 1600 and producing the first accurate geographical map of China. He demonstrates that geometry, the measurement of the earth, is a universal body of knowledge born in the West and carried, across the centuries, to the very ends of the known world. The Chinese come to know Euclidean geometry only through him. Euclid's books are translated into Chinese for the first time by a man from the Marche, who possessed the geometric knowledge to do so. A subtle but tenacious thread connects the Bishop Clodoald buried in the Chienti Valley, from Bevignate who builds aqueducts and cathedrals, the four-crowned stonecutter martyrs, and the Jesuit who carries Euclid to the east. The thread of geometric knowledge as a deep patrimony of the Christian Mediterranean West. The story of San Claudio at Chienti is, ultimately, a story of layerings, geographical, religious, political, and cultural. A Merovingian bishop who fled the Parisian court becomes the spiritual founder of a valley in the Marche. Charlemagne builds upon that memory his own symbolic legitimacy. Centuries later, a monk born in Singoli carries the knowledge of master builders to construct one of the most beautiful cathedrals in Italy and to establish the first documented Masonic lodge in the country. In a London lodge of the 19th century, takes the name of the stonecutter saints of the 4th century. In order to rewrite the history of a tradition whose roots lie in central Italy, while Napoleon seizes the physical relics of that same saint to lend his burial edict its name. All of this is contained within a fresco at the far end of a church in the Chienti Valley. A man with hammer, carpenter's square and apron, looking down at those who enter from his lunette above. He is not a simple builder. He is a bishop, a saint, a patron of craftsmen, a martyr by namesake association, a symbol of continuity between the Merovingian world and the Carolingian, between Euclidean geometry and the medieval cathedral, between the Marche and all of Europe. Simonetta Torresi's 30 years of research, rooted in the geography of history, shows how this territory, the Chienti Valley, singly, since Severino Marche, Villa Potenza, Cordonia, is not a periphery of Italian and European history, but one of its driving centers, a place where the great currents of medieval civilization meet, interweave, and leave traces still readable today. For those who know where to look and how to read the landscape as an open text. That's all for today. See you in the next episode of The Very Origin of Europe, here on Compelling Topics.
I went to